Alright, so welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be looking at the Eldrazi Incursion Precon. We're going to start a couple of video series on it. First video is going to be, per usual, going over the commander and the spreadsheets. The second video, we're going to go over the creature spells included in this deck. And then in the third video, we will do the non-creature, non-land cards, and we will conclude with going over the lands. We're going to do the commander a little bit differently because the commander gets technical. And so I want to pull up the Gatherer. It's a website put together by Wizards of the Coast that includes a listing of all of the cards as well as all of the official rulings associated with that specific card. And with this commander, it can get a little bit technical here. So we're going to go through those rulings, and I'll do my best to explain it to you. I also struggle. I understand the concept of how this works, but I struggle with keeping the facts straight a little bit. So if I stumble around, please forgive me. It can get pretty complicated, but we'll do our best here. So let's go ahead and just jump right into this craziness here. All right. So our commander is Ulalek, the Fused Atrocity. So, Ulalek is a 5-color deck. However, he also has Devoid. Most of the creature spells, in fact, there is not a single creature card in this deck that has a color. Even though there are lots of spells like Ulalek where they have colors up here in their mana, their casting costs, they all have Devoid on them. What Devoid does is, despite this card's color identity, it is still counted as colorless. So, its color identity is 5-color. However, when it comes to cards that have protection from colors, or protection from, protection from colors, or whenever a player plays a spell of a certain color, or spells your opponent's cost of a certain color, cost more to cast, or whatever the case is, these spells that have Devoid count as colorless, regardless of what is in their mana cost. And regardless of where they are. Command zone, hand, library, graveyard, exile, it doesn't matter. They are considered for every single intent and purpose other than color identity. And by color identity, I mean you can build a 5-color deck around this. Even though it's colorless, it has no color. Its secondary ability is really complicated. It sounds straightforward, but once you get into the nitty-gritty of it, it can be pretty tough to follow along and track with. Because it heavily involves what's called the stack. So for those that don't understand what the stack is something that is always happening around you as you're playing the game. The stack is constantly building up and being resolved. And so how it works is, let's say that I play a sorcery spell. Let's say that I'll play a 2-cost sorcery. We're playing a 4-player game, I'll play a 2-cost sorcery. One of my opponents will decide that they don't like me playing that, and so they will counter that spell. They'll play tap 2 and play it, or whatever, and they'll play a counter spell on me. Okay? And then, for the sake of argument, let's say that the next player down doesn't want them to counter that spell, and they want my spell to go through. So they're going to play a counter spell on the original counter spell. Right? And so on and so forth. All of these effects can just build and build and build and build and build up and build up. Right? So this is the stack. This pile of things, of effects and abilities and all of this is the stack. And so how the stack works is it starts at the bottom, and everything that you play piles up on top of that, in the order that it is piled up on top of. Then, when everything is said and done, and nobody's going to add to the top of it anymore, you start at the top, and you work your way backwards. So you start at the top, and we'll say that in our example, right, sorcery and the counterspell, and then that counterspell gets countered. So we would start at the top. The first thing that we would do is we would start with the most recent counterspell. And so that counterspell would then remove the first counterspell from the stack. And so both of those, as you resolved the top one, the second one would disappear. And so then my sorcery would be able to go through. Right? And so the stack builds, and then it starts at the top, and it goes backwards every single time. Everything, just about everything that you do in Magic involves the stack, even attacking. Even when you tap a creature to declare it as attacking, that declaration of attacking, that when you say this creature is attacking, it goes on the stack. You know what I mean? And because there are spells and abilities that whenever a creature attacks, do this, right? So, I'm going to declare a creature as attacking, that goes on the stack. I'm going to play a sorcery spell, that goes on the stack. I'm going to play a creature spell, that goes on the stack. I'm going to tap a creature to activate an ability, that goes on the stack. You know what I'm saying? And so, this spell, this commander that we're dealing with here, coming back here, is going to deal a lot with the stack and the order. And if you get that stack wrong, you're not going to be able to take full advantage of what this guy is capable of. And he's capable of absolute crap ton of things. And he can absolutely fly if you get his stack abilities correct. So, whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, we're going to start that. We're just going to start with that. So on the stack, when it comes to the stack, casting a spell is defined as putting a card on the stack and paying the required costs. So in my example, right, when I cast the spell, it's not when the spell resolves. It is when I tap 3 and I'm going to play this instant. At that moment, it is cast. It is on the stack, it is cast. Players can respond to that with their counterspells or whatnot, but regardless of how they respond to it, as far as casting triggers go, whenever you cast a spell, whenever blah blah blah, whenever you cast, that is the cast trigger, is when you have put it on the stack and paid all of the appropriate costs. That spell is cast. Whether it hits the battlefield or not, it is cast. So, whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, you may pay 2 colorless. If you do, copy all spells you control. So now, where you got to define a spell. A spell is any unresolved thing. Anything in the stack is a spell. As soon as it hits the battlefield, it's not a spell. So, if it hits the battlefield, it becomes a permanent. So, if I have a whole bunch of creatures, they no longer count as spells. But when they're on the stack, before they actually resolve, they count as spells. But then the moment that they hit that battlefield, they become permanents instead of spells. So copy all spells you control. So that's any instants or sorceries or creatures that you have on the stack at that moment. Then copy all other activated and triggered abilities you control. So those abilities are abilities that are on the stack. That's not that you have the ability to use. Those are abilities that you have already triggered at this moment, at this point. Okay? So basically, you may pay 2 colorless whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell to duplicate everything that you have already on the stack. So you can... It gets really technical here. You may choose new targets for the copies. If you don't choose new targets for the copies, then they come in targeting the same things that the original spells did. That's just kind of the default. So that is the core of how this works. But let's there are a lot of rulings here, so let's look at the technicalities of it. First thing, Ulalek must be on the battlefield in order for its triggered ability to trigger. Casting Ulalek itself will not cause that ability to trigger. Okay, so we can't do this unless he's on the battlefield. Got it. Each copy will have the same targets as the spell or ability it is copying unless you choose new ones. You may change any number of the targets, including all of them or none of them. If the spell is a permanent spell with targets, such as an aura, you may also choose a new target for that spell. The new targets must be legal. If for any target you can't choose a new legal target, then it remains unchanged even if the current target is illegal. Okay, so if you, let's say for whatever reason, you cast an aura spell that gives a creature hexproof, or gives a creature shroud, is a better example. Shroud, it can no longer be the target of spells or abilities. Well, at that point, one of them, even though that target is illegal, let's say that's the only creature on the battlefield, you wouldn't be able to target a different creature, but you wouldn't be able to also target the original creature, so then it just would disappear. So, the copies are created on the stack, so they are not cast or activated. Creating the copies won't cause abilities that trigger when a player casts a spell or activates an ability to trigger. Abilities of copied spells that say when you cast this spell will also not trigger. So, that is very important, because otherwise you would be able to just sit there and pay 2 and pay 2 and pay 2 and pay 2 and pay 2, and for every time that you pay 2, you duplicate a whole bunch of stuff like 50 times in a row. You can do that if between all of those you're playing a creature spell that has flash. So you're able to with instant speed, sneak in onto the stack another creature. You know? So that gives flash creatures a huge benefit in this deck. Because you can flash in you can play a spell, do a bunch of things, and then pay the 2, flash in a creature, pay the 2 again, and then as you resolve, you would duplicate the original duplications, and so it just gets out of control if you do it correctly. And that does work. That does actually work that way. Because let's say I play let's just keep it simple. Let's say I play a 2-cost Eldrazi, and I'm gonna pay 2. And let's say that when that 2-cost Eldrazi enters the battlefield, I create 2 1/1 creature tokens. Just so for illustration purposes. So I'm gonna play this spell. I'm gonna cast it, and then I'm gonna trigger Ulalek's ability here. Pay 2. Copy all spells I control. So the original creature goes on the stack. Ulalek's ability goes on immediately on top of that. And then I'm going to cast a spell with let's say I have a 3-cost creature with flash. I'm going to play that with instant speed so that before all of that resolves, I now have another creature that I'm casting, that I have cast, right? And so then I can pay Ulalek's ability again, and pay 2, and so Ulalek will then go onto the top of the stack again. So you resolve that in reverse order, right? So you'll have the second Ulalek ability that will duplicate your flash spell. It will duplicate your first Ulalek trigger, right? And so in duplicating your first Ulalek trigger, you will end up having everything below your original Ulalek trigger, you'll duplicate again. And so you'll end up having duplicated duplicates. Right? And so it just gets, it's a big funnel, it's a big tree, a big tier system. For every flash spell that you get in, and every time you trigger that Ulalek ability again, the first original thing you do just gets more and more and more and more prolific. And so the order very much matters. Because, for example, if you had an ability that when you cast a spell, this ability triggers, right? And you put that spell on the stack, but then you put Ulalek's ability here on the stack before you put that spell's whenever you cast trigger on the stack, then you wouldn't duplicate that casting ability, that casting trigger. So it gets really technical. You just got to make sure that you put Ulalek on top of absolutely everything. As long as you make sure that Ulalek is on top and it's the last thing that you do, you should be okay. So moving on to the next one. Copies created on the stack are not cast. We already talked about that. If a spell or ability that's copied is modal, which means it's choose one or the like, the copy will have the same mode. You can't choose different ones. So that's important to note, because there are instances of that in this deck. They have to be the same node, the same mode every single time that you're copying. Because it's not the spell necessarily that is on the stack, so much as that ability of the spell. It's both. But you won't be able to change what you've chosen. You'll just duplicate the same one that you've chosen. Because you're casting it as this spell with this ability. If that makes any sense. If the spell or ability that's copied has an X, whose value was determined as it was cast or activated, the copy will have the same value X. So that's good to know also. You play, for example, a Endless one, which is an X cost Eldrazi enters the battlefield with X/1/1 counters on it. Duplicate that, and the new copy enters the battlefield with the same 1/1 counters on it. If the spell or ability that's copied has a damage divided as it was cast or activated, such as like a fireball or a comet storm or things like that, the division can't be changed, although the targets receiving that damage still can. The same is true of spells and abilities that distribute counters. So that is very interesting too. If, for example, I cast a fireball and I distribute, right, you divide that damage among a number of target things, and I duplicate that fireball, the numbers become the exact same. So let's say I deal 6 damage to one target, 4 damage to another target, and 3 damage to another target, and then I duplicate that spell. That copy will deal 6 damage, 3 damage, or 4 damage, and 2 damage, or whatever it was that I said. Those numbers will stay the same, but you can change what they target. And they can hit different things, but the distribution has to be the same. The controller of a copy can't choose to pay alternative or additional costs for the copy, so such as like kicker, So, say I cast a spell with Kicker, I wouldn't be able to, when I duplicated that, I wouldn't be able to pay those Kicker costs as I'm casting that. However, effects based on any alternative or additional costs that were paid for the original spell are copied as though those same costs were paid for the copy. So I can't kick things copies independently of each other. But if I kicked the original spell, the second spell is kicked. Or the copy is kicked. Resolving copies of permanent spells become tokens as they enter the battlefield. So that's key, because there are a lot of spells that things that deal specifically with permanents. If you have a permanent, this thing. If you have a permanent, that thing. Right? These tokens are not considered created when this happens. A card with Devoid is just colorless. It's not colorless and the colors of mana in its mana cost. Other cards and abilities can give a card with Devoid a color. If that happens, it is just the new color, not that color, and colorless. Devoid works in all zones, not just on the battlefield. If a card loses Devoid, it will still be colorless. This is because effects that change an object's color, like that one created by Devoid, are considered before the object loses Devoid. That's really interesting. I have to read that again. If a card loses Devoid, it will still be colorless. This is because effects that change an object's color, like the one created by Devoid, are considered before the object loses Devoid. Okay. That makes sense to me. I had to read it again. Basically what that means is if you have an enchantment on the battlefield that says creatures you control are green, let's say, and you have a Devoid spell on there, your Devoid will override that. And so that color, that creature, is still colorless, regardless. Even though it says they are green, that one says it has no color. And so no color will override green. Because not always overrides, or can't always overrides does. Right? So, because of that, let's say that creature, then you're like, I'm going to do something and somehow cause it to lose Devoid. Well, Devoid still overrides is green. And because it overrides is green, also the base green in that mana cost, it still remains colorless. The last one, Devoid doesn't affect the color identity of the card for the purposes of the commander variant. For example, while Obtruse Appropriation is colorless because it has Devoid, its color identity is still white and black, and it cannot be included in a commander deck where the commander's color identity does not include both white and black. And that is again why Ulalek here is all 5 colors, but is a colorless spell. Right? So, this commander has a lot of different facets about it. I've just been talking for 20 minutes now on this commander card alone. Just got one more quick thing that I want to go over about it, and then we'll jump into the spreadsheets real quick. But I wanted to make sure that you guys understand all the technicalities and the ins and outs of this one, because it can get mind-blowing, and it's also really easy to play wrong. So Ulalek is a 5 cost, but you can see it has that diamond shape, and that diamond shape, also repeated down here, that means specifically colorless. A lot of times when you play a spell, right, let's say you play a spell that costs green and 2. And that 2 is just a generic colorless symbol, right? You can spend mana of any color to play that. Well, if that colorless symbol has a diamond in it like this, that means that it has to be from a source that produces specifically colorless mana. And so for this, you can pay either a white or a specifically colorless, or a blue or a specifically colorless, and a black or a specifically colorless, and so on and so forth. And so that's just, with the casting cost of this, that means that this is easier to cast than a spell that would just cost one of each color, but it's more difficult than a spell that would just be like generically 5 colorless to cast. So that's just something worth considering and keeping in mind for that. Alright, so sorry about the long-winded. I just wanted to give you guys a thorough breakdown of this guy. We'll go ahead and jump into the spreadsheets now, and then we'll call it. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at this deck overall here. Alright, so first thing, this deck has a really high overall converted mana cost at 4.47 as the average converted mana cost, excluding lands. Including lands in that won't give you an accurate description or depiction of what you're looking at for the deck, but with 4.47, that's pretty darn high. I like to run low 3s to upper 2s personally. Upper 2s being really hard, lower to actually make, but lower 3s is a little bit better and more manageable and feasible. So it's high on the converted mana cost. It also has 5 legendaries in it, with one of them being a planeswalker. We have 6 instants and 5 sorceries, 31 creatures, 14 artifacts, 4 enchantments, and 32 lands. That's not correct, because there are actually 38 lands in this. Ignore the spreadsheet technical difficulty on that. I don't know exactly what's going on there. I'll look into it in a little bit. But it has 38 lands and 62 non-lands, including the commander. Now, really interesting thing about this deck is, despite having 61 despite having that many non-land cards in it, only one of the cards in this entire deck is black. Only 5 of them are green. Only one of them is white. Only one of them is blue, and none of them are red. 54 of them are considered colorless. Now that means with devoid or just being flat out colorless. So this deck does not have very many non-colorless cards. It's very focused in that regard. We also have, let's flip over here to the color ratio a little bit. This deck's overall devotion to black is 7. To green is 12. To white is 4. Blue is 9. And red is 4. So we do not have very many colored mana needed to run this deck at all. Which is why most of the lands in this deck, and I'll go over this in the last video of the series, but you can see, just at an overview, most of them tap for colorless and other colors. And /or. And also a really interesting thing about that, every single card in this deck is a singleton. So there's only one of each basic land in this deck. There's no duplicates. This is just pure singleton deck, which is a point of interest, at least. As far as the deck's function goes, this deck has 30 ramp cards. And that's whether those cards are producing Eldrazi Scions or spawns, which you can sacrifice them to add a colorless to your mana pool, or their color spells you cast cost less to cast, or things like that. There are 30 cards in here that will help you cast spells more efficiently. And with a CMC of 4.4, having half of your non-land cards contribute to that is very helpful. And so because of that, this deck can really get off the ground on itself. And it can get going. It sometimes just takes a couple of turns to do. But by usually turn 5 or 6, which, to be fair, is a bit late, but that's 5 or 6 on a bad day, you should be up and running. And not just up and running, but up and kind of destroying people. 14 draw cards, 13 control cards, so not the focus of the deck, but it definitely can replenish its hand if it needs to. 3 protection cards, 30 miscellaneous utility cards, and that's mostly because Eldrazi have the ability to do randomness. Eldrazi, there are a couple of core mechanics to Eldrazi, but for the most part, they're kind of all over the place. They just do weird abilities at weird times for weird reasons and in weird ways, which is that's kind of part of the whole point behind Eldrazi. Very utilitarian, and so that having 30 Mystic Utility cards here makes sense. 17 cards are token generation. Most of those are spawns or scions, which also explains why there are 30 ramp cards. 12 cards involve exiling cards from either your opponent's graveyards, or their battlefields, or their libraries, or even your own library, graveyard, or battlefield. And there is 1 card that involves processing. And processing can simply be explained by unexile, which is, it tends to, processing cards, returning cards from exile to either your opponent's graveyards or their hands or whatever the case is, sometimes to your own battlefield, but not very often. But there's only 1 processor card in this deck. That's not really what this deck focuses on. So that's the spreadsheet overview. As far as from the standpoint of playing, I had a little bit of trouble, and this could also be luck of the draw. I had a little bit of trouble getting the deck up off the ground, but once I did, it flew, and it felt really good. It played really well. I was able to create lots of creatures, have a lot of mana, and swing with all the great big Eldrazi's, which is really fun. A couple of cards that I particularly like. There's one that you can tap to create a 10/10 Eldrazi creature, and then you can give it trample with some other cards and swing with a whole bunch of 10/10 Eldrazi's. You can also give all of your tokens Annihilator 1. There's a lot of Annihilator in this deck, which is really helpful for controlling your opponent's board states. Anyway, I had a lot of fun playing this deck. I was really happy with it. I feel like it was slower than I would have liked it to be, but it's a good base, and with some relatively cheap upgrades, it can be made a whole lot better. But which is actually what I'm going to do at the end of this series of videos, is I'm going to upgrade it. I might include some not so cheap upgrades too, but we'll see how that all goes. But anyway, we'll go ahead and jump into the deck list in the next video. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe. I'll catch you next time. Alright, welcome back. We're going to today we're going to go ahead and jump into the creature cards of the Eldrazi Incursion Precon deck. We kind of spent a lot of time going over the commander last time, but this time I'll kind of try and hit some of the interactions between that commander and the cards in here, and as brief as I can. But let's go ahead and jump right on into it. Okay, so the first creature card that we have in this deck to go over is Elder Deep Fiend. It's a 8-cost 5/6 with flash. So remember, flash is really useful because you'll be able to activate this twice. You know, you play a spell, you activate this, you play the cast this in response, and then activate that again, which duplicates your first trigger of this. Anyway. So Flash is fantastic to have in this deck. Allows you to really capitalize on your commander here. It also has Emerge 7, so it's Emerge 5 and 2 blue. Emerge is you may cast this spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the Emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. When you cast this spell, tap up to 4 target permanents. So, if you have this ability go on the stack, before if you cast the spell, right, and then you put this ability on the stack, and then you activate this, you can duplicate this casting trigger. But if you do this, you get overexcited and you put this on the stack before you activate this, then you're not going to be able to get that duplication on there. So the order really, really, really matters, especially with Elder Deep Fiend. So here we got Ulamog's Nullifier is a 4-cost with Devoid. And again, there's Flash, so I don't need to explain that again. But Flash, especially on a lower 4-cost, that's super great. It also has Flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may put 2 cards your opponents own from exile into their owners' graveyards. If you do, counter target spell. So we get some counter spell in there. Returning from exile with the Flash. Very useful. There we go. Titan's Vanguard is a 4-cost. It's a 5-cost, 5/5 with, again, there's Devoid. When you cast this spell, and whenever Titan's Vanguard attacks, put a 1/1 counter on each colorless creature you control. It also has Trample. So that's good. Getting all those 1/1 counters in, making your already large creatures even bigger. Sire of Stagnation, 6-cost, 5/7, blue-black, although it is Devoid. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library, and you draw 2 cards. So you get some card draw there. Drowner of Hope is a 6-cost, blue, but it has Devoid, 5/5. Whenever Drowner of Hope enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens. They have sacrifice this creature, add colorless, and a secondary ability, sacrifice an Eldrazi Scion, tap target creature. So again, with this one, you cast this one, you put it on the stack. You activate this ability, you duplicate this, right? So now you've got 2 of these Drowners of Hope down here. But then let's flash in that counter spell, right? And let's or some other creature with flash. Probably not that one. That could end badly. Flash in an Elder Deep Fiend, say, right? If you have that much mana, and so then you can pay 2 again, and you would duplicate your duplication trigger. And so your duplication trigger would go off again. So then you'd have 3. By the time it's all said and done, you'd have 3 Drowners of Hope entering the battlefield. Those enter the battlefield, and for each of those 3, you're going to create 2 1/1 Eldrazi Scions. And so just by getting that order right and flashing in a creature real quick, you can end up getting 6 extra 1/1 creatures that each sacrifices. You can sacrifice each of them for 1 colorless mana. So the order and the stack, it all kind of surrounds itself with this commander, making him a whole lot of fun, and he can get exponential real fast. We have Twins of Discord. It's a 7-cost 8/6. Whenever you attack, choose odd or even. Creatures with mana value of that quality can't block this turn. Each other colorless creature you control has Bloodthirst 2. Couple of different things going on here. Each other colorless creature you control has Bloodthirst 2. Bloodthirst 2 means that when a creature enters the battlefield, it enters with 2 1/1 counters on it if an opponent has lost life this turn when it enters the battlefield. So if you've already dealt damage to an opponent, or an opponent has lost life for whatever the blazes reason on your turn, if you have this on the field, each other colorless creature you control enters the battlefield with Bloodthirst 2, and will have 2 1/1 counters on it. Now, let's say that you declare this guy as an attacker, and you choose your odd or even, right? So I'm declaring this as an attacker, and then I'm going to cast a spell, an Eldrazi spell with flash, right? So then I can trigger this, which will allow me to... That won't work. Sorry, it's complicated. I just messed myself up. But as we looked at before, I wouldn't be able to choose again. It would duplicate the already chosen mode, rather than allowing me to choose odd and even, thusly making it so all of my creatures have unblockable. That's not how that works. Would not be able to do that. Alright, next creature. Sifter of Skulls is a 4-cost devoid with black. It's a 4/3. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token. It has, guessed it, sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless. Next up, we have Oblivion Sower, which is a 6-cost 5/8. It's just colorless. Doesn't need devoid. It's just generic colorless. When you cast this spell, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of their library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. So if you've been exiling your opponent's piles a whole bunch, then you can pop this guy. Even if this guy gets countered and doesn't hit the battlefield, it still counts as being cast, and so you would still do this ability. This ability would still go on the stack, and you could also duplicate it with this, and you would be able to choose new targets if you do your ordering correctly. So, yes, it gets complicated. It gets complicated and fun. So, next up, we have Wastscape. Battle Mage is a 2-cost. There's specifically colorless up there. And it's a 2/2. And it has Kicker of Green and or Kicker of Blue and 1 generic colorless. Whenever you cast this spell, if it was kicked with its green kicker, exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. Whenever you cast this spell, if it was kicked with its blue and generic colorless kicker, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If you pay both kickers, you would do both of those things. And if you paid both kickers and you triggered Ulalek, you would do both of those things twice, because kicker costs would transfer to the new copy. Next up, we have Glaring Fleshraker, which is a 3-cost. That's a colorless specific up on the top. It is a 2/2 that has, whenever you cast a colorless spell, create a 0/1 Eldrazi Scion, Eldrazi 0/1 Eldrazi Spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature, add colorless. Whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, Glaring Fleshraker deals 1 damage to each opponent. So you got a little bit of pinger going on here, some token generation, and as you generate tokens, you're triggering your pinger some more. So that's pretty good, especially for a 3-cost, and get some repeatable mana ramp. Works out really well. And you can cast a spell, right? Trigger this, and then after this, you put this ability on the stack. Let's say I'm going to cast this next creature, which is Artisan of Kozilek. I'll get into that later, right? So let's say I'm casting this. I'm going to put this on the stack. I'm going to put its ability on the stack. Then I'm going to put this ability on the stack. And then I'm going to trigger this. And it's going to copy all of those casting abilities once. And so instead of putting one Scion, I will put 2 Scions. And so that can build up pretty well. So, there's the Artisan of Kozilek. It is a 9-cost 10/9. When you cast this spell, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It has Annihilator 2. Annihilator is pretty good in this deck, and there's a fair amount of it. Whenever a creature with Annihilator attacks, defending player sacrifices a number of permanents specified in the Annihilator number, so this one is Annihilator 2. So the defending player would sacrifice 2 permanents. Here we have a 3-cost 1/3, black, but it has Devoid. Whenever you cast this spell, remove all counters from up to 1 target permanent or opponent. The next spell you cast this turn costs 1 colorless less to cast for each counter removed this way. It has Death Touch. So that one is fairly situational. If you're running, you get your cards that put 1/1 counters on your creatures, or you're playing against an opponent that... You get playing against an opponent that puts out a lot of counters on their stuff, then you can use this to kind of clear that. Fairly situational for a 3-cost. It's pretty good. We got Angelic Aberration. Is a 6-cost white, but again, there's Devoid. It's a 4/4 with flying and vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of creatures, each with base power or toughness 1 or less. Create that many 4/4 colorless Eldrazi Angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance. Essentially, when you play this, you can use it to turn all of your spawns and scions into 4/4 angels with flying and vigilance. Here's World Breaker, is a 7-cost green with Devoid. It's a 5/7. When you cast this spell, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. So that's when you cast, regardless of counter. It has Reach. And pay 3, and that's 1 colorless down here, sacrifice a land, return World Breaker from your graveyard to your hand. So you can repeatedly pay 7, and technically 10, to keep exiling a target artifact, enchantment, or land. And land exile is really hard and not super common to find. But paying 10 for it, I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit spendy, and we could use that slot for another card. But I also understand it being in here. It adds a solid amount of unique utility to this deck. Here we have Snapping Voidcraw. Is a 3-cost blue-green with Devoid. It's a 1/3. And it has tap, add 2 colorless to your mana pool, specifically colorless. And it also has pay 3 and 1 specifically colorless, tap to draw a card. So you get some card draw there. All is Dust is a 7-cost Kindred Sorcery Eldrazi, so it's a tribal Eldrazi sorcery. It counts as an Eldrazi spell, so when I play this, I can activate this in response to playing that sorcery there. And so what it does, each player sacrifices all permanents they control that are 1 or more colors. Again, there are about 10 permanents tops in this deck that have any color to it because of Devoid rulings. So this is essentially an exile board wipe that only hits your opponents. It is a 7-cost, but with this deck, you can sacrifice 7. I was talking about how easy it is to get those scions and spawns in this deck, and you've been seeing a whole bunch of instances of that here. That is not super difficult to be able to reliably swing. Next up, we have Inversion Behemoth. This is a 4-cost. Move this around a little bit. There we go. It is a 4-cost with 2 specifically colorless, and it is a 2/9. At the beginning of combat on your turn, switch the power and toughness of each of any number of target creatures until end of turn. So, basically, at the beginning of combat on my turn, I can just say, okay, yeah, instead of being a 2/1, I want that one to be a 1/2, or whatever. And so you can do that. The interesting thing about this is that if you have a creature with, like, let's say your opponents have a bunch of walls that are like 0/6s, and you have this on the field, and it swaps them. Instead of being a 0/6, it becomes a 6/0, and if it has toughness 0, it immediately dies. And so this can actually remove creatures with 0 power from the game that you choose. So it won't hit your 0/1 tokens, but it'll hit your opponent's 0 whatever creatures or tokens or whatever it ends up that they have, which can be really helpful. And if they're running a deck that is toughness heavy or power heavy or whatever, you can use this to kind of mess with them a little bit here. So very good on the utility there, and with it being a 2/9, you can make it a 9/2 and have it swing for pain. Next up, we have the Spawnbed Protector, which is a 7-cost 6/8. At the beginning of your end step, return up to 1 target Eldrazi creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So that's at the beginning of your end step. That's every turn you're doing this. And then you're creating 2 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens that have sacrificed this creature. Add 1 colorless to your mana pool. So every turn you're putting a creature from your graveyard back in your hand, and you are adding a colorless to your mana pool. I just realized that is not a creature. That's a sorcery. I put that in the wrong pile. That's okay. We'll just add it to this video and move on. So, the next creature we have is Morophon, the Boundless. Is a non-Eldrazi, sort of. It is a 7 generic colorless 6/6 creature. However, it does have Changeling. Now, Changeling this card is every creature type, so it does count still as an Eldrazi spell, even though it doesn't say it is an Eldrazi. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Obviously, in this deck, you definitely want to choose Wizards. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, you would pick Eldrazi. Spells of the chosen type, Wizards. You cast, cost white, blue, black, red, green, less to cast. This effect reduces only the amount of colored mana you pay. So, spells like this one. Right? It's got white and 2. I would only have to pay the 2 colorless for this. I wouldn't need to pay the white mana. For it, because it's an Eldrazi. And you would obviously choose Eldrazi for this, not Wizards, despite my joking. Other creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. So this can be really helpful to help you get around the annoyance of having to get colored mana to cast spells. This deck runs an absolute ton of pain lands in it, and I'll get into that later. So with this, you won't have to deal with that quite as much. And then it also makes all of your creatures a little bit bigger, which is nice. Next up is that Eldrazi Displacer that I was mentioning a minute ago. It is a white 3-cost 3/3, but it has Devoid. You may pay 2 and 1 specifically colorless, exile another target creature, and then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So you can essentially blink a creature and duplicate its enter the battlefield effects, or get them to trigger again, which is good because we have a solid number of those in this deck. We have the alternate commander for this deck is Azlask. The Swelling Scourge is a 3-cost, 2/2 colorless creature. Whenever Azlask, the Swelling Scourge, or another colorless creature you control dies, you gain an experience counter. Pay 1 of each color. Creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of experience counters you have. Scions and Spawns you control gain Indestructible and Annihilator 1 until end of turn. And if you have an army of Scions, that can be absolutely brutal. And you can just use that to wreak havoc and destruction. Because for each of those, even if you don't have any experience counters and they get +0/+0, you're still giving them Indestructible and Annihilator 1. And so for each of those that you use to attack, your opponents have to sacrifice a permanent. And that's a permanent. That they can sacrifice lands, they can sacrifice anything that they want. So you can eventually, if you hit them with enough Annihilator, you can wipe their entire board state out, which is really nice and really helpful. Next up, we have Ulamog's Dreadsire. It is a 10-cost, 10/10 with Vigilance. It also has Ward. Sacrifice a permanent with mana value 1 or greater. It means that it can't be targeted by spells or abilities unless it's that those spells or abilities controllers sacrifice a creature that has a mana value. So it can't be a token. It has to be a creature that they spent mana to play. And it can't be a 0-cost creature either. It has to have a mana cost of at least 1 in order to target this. It also has an ability that allows it to tap to create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. So tap, create another token. Tap, create another token. Tap, create another token. Oh, we can also duplicate this when we cast it by paying an extra 2. And so then we can have 2 of these monster engines going, and it just gets crazy. The next creature we have is Endbringer. Is a 6-cost with 1 of those being specifically colorless. It is a 5/5. Untap it during each other player's untap step. You can tap it to deal 1 damage to any target. Or you can pay 1 specifically colorless and tap it. Target creature can't attack or block this turn. Or you can pay 2 colorless specifically and tap it to draw a card. So lots of utility, lots of different options there. You're untapping it quite a bit. It can be particularly painful for your opponents if you're burning them. Very utilitarian for yourself if you're drawing cards. And it's because it's a tap ability, you can use it as an instant, and you can just tack it on whenever you're casting a spell. You can tack that in and duplicate it just for fun. Next creature we have is Benthic Anomaly, which is a 7-cost, with 1 being blue. It's a 7/8 with Devoid. Whenever you cast the spell for each opponent, choose a creature that player controls. Create a token that's a copy of one of those creatures, except its power is equal to the total power of those sacrificed creatures, and its toughness is equal to the total toughness of those creatures, and its colorless Eldrazi creature. So, clone a creature and make it a lot bigger based on the other creatures that are sacrificed, and make a token of it. That can be really helpful. Deep Fathom Skulker is a 6-cost 4/4 with Devoid. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Pay 3 colorless and 1 specifically colorless. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Okay. We have Hideous Taskmasters, a 7-cost 7/2 with Devoid. When you cast this spell, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1 until end of turn. This creature in and of itself has Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1. So this can be really useful for, hey, I'm going to borrow your creatures, also make them better, and also you're sacrificing extra permanents. And you can use that Annihilator to, you can basically use your opponents to help remove things that on one of your. The more opponents you have, the more pain you can inflict if you if you have all of those creatures attack one player, and you can focus that Annihilator, is what I was trying to say with that, but then the words got away from me. The next creature that we have here is Bismuth Mindrender, which is a 4-cost with a black. It's devoid for 3 with Menace. Whenever Bismuth Mindrender deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast that card by paying life equal to the spell's mana value, rather than paying the mana cost itself. So this can be really useful for, hey, I'm going to take some of your stuff. You don't get it anymore. It's going into exile, which I can do things with that, with your stuff that are in exile. But at the moment, I can also pay life to cast your stuff out of exile, which is very nice as well. Here we have Vile Redeemer, which is a 3-cost green with Devoid and Flash. 3-cost Flash, very helpful. When you cast this spell, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, create a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion creature token for each non-token creature that died under your control this turn. These tokens have sacrificed this creature, add colorless. So, this basically allows you to turn creatures that have been killed or board wiped or whatever the case is by your opponents into colorless creatures, or into mana ramp, which will help you rebuild your board state and recover yourself. Chittering Dispatcher is a 3-cost 2/3 with Devoid and Myriad. When Chittering Dispatcher leaves the battlefield, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature, add colorless to your mana pool. The key with this creature is its Myriad. So, Myriad is whenever it attacks, for each other opponent, other than the player that is being attacked by this creature, create a copy of it that is tapped and attacking that creature. Exile those tokens at the end of combat. And so, those tokens are coming in, and then at the end of combat, those tokens are leaving, and you're generating scions as those tokens are leaving the battlefield. And so, that ability can generate tons of 1/1 or 0/1, tons of 0/1s for you, that, depending on what you end up drawing into, you can give them Indestructible and Annihilator, and you can just build up a huge army pretty darn quickly just with that card. And the last creature of this deck here is Ulamog's Crusher, which is an 8-cost 8/8 with Annihilator 2, and it attacks each combat if able. So this is the creatures of the Eldrazi Incursion Precon deck. In the next video, we're going to go over the non-creature cards. They'll be relatively quicker and simpler than the creature, and definitely simpler than the commander. And then in the final video, we'll go ahead and hit up those land cards. But for now, thanks for watching, like and subscribe. I'll catch you next time. Alright, hey, hi, howdy. We're going to get into today the non-creature, non-land cards of the Eldrazi Incursion Precon deck. Try and jump through it as quickly as I can. I kind of took up a lot of time in the previous couple of videos, trying to give a thorough understanding of the commander and some of the creatures. But let's go ahead and jump right into this one. Alright, so the first non-creature, non-land card that we have here is Eldrazi Conscription. It's an 8-cost Kindred enchantment, which means that it counts as an Eldrazi spell when you cast it. So you can trigger this on it. Enchanted creature gets +10/+10 and has Trample and Annihilator 2. So that you can use that to just basically, commander damage can be really easy to get if you put that there, or if you put it on one of your big 10/10s or whatnot. Make it a 20/20, however you want to do it. But this can easily put you in a position where you're able to start taking out some of your opponents if you haven't already. We also have Garruk's Uprising, which is a 3-cost green enchantment. Ooh, this is our first actual colored spell that we've encountered so far in this deck, in this series. When Garruk's Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you're going to draw a card. Creatures you control have Trample. That's also really helpful. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you're going to draw a card. So lots of card draw. Giving your bigger creatures Trample is super valuable. Get that excess damage to go through, regardless of whether it's blocked or not. For a 3-cost, fantastic pick for this deck here. We got Awakening Zone is a 3-cost, another 3-cost green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add colorless to your mana pool. So that's pretty also straightforward, gaining an extra token every upkeep. Next, we have Imprisoned in the Moon is a 3-cost blue aura. Enchant creature, land, or planeswalker. Enchanted Permanent is a colorless land with tap, add colorless, and it loses all other card types and abilities. Essentially, you just turn anything into a colorless land, and it's gone. The only way to bring it back would be to remove Imprisoned from the Moon from the battlefield. Very powerful removal aura. We also have Mystic Forge, which is a 4-cost artifact. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library. So that's really helpful because, again, you've seen how many colorless spells are in this deck, which is like 90% of them. And you has a tap ability. You can tap it to pay 1 life, and pay 1 life to exile the top card of your library. So that is a very useful utility card for those first 2, being able to look and cast from the top of your library. We got some mana rocks here. Quintessential Soul Ring, 1-cost, tap, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Of course, that one is in here. Very useful. And then we have a solid number of talismans, which are, we have 4 of them. So these are artifacts that cost 2 to play, and you can either tap them to pay a color or to get a colorless mana, or you can tap them to add 1 of 2 colors to your mana pool and have the talisman deal 1 damage to you. So we have the blue-black, the red-green, the blue-green, and the black-green versions of the talismans here. We also have Forsaken Monument. Put that up here. Forsaken Monument is a 5-cost legendary artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless mana, you may add an additional colorless mana to your mana pool. So you get some ramp, you get some buff, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. So you got ramp, you got buff, and you're gaining life as you're casting spells. Very good as just a generic utility, especially in a deck that is this focused on colorless. We also have Herald's Horn, which is also excellent. This is being a very strong tribal deck. It is a 3-cost artifact. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. We would choose Eldrazi. Creature spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 colorless less to cast. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it is a creature card of the chosen type, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. So you basically get an extra draw if the top card of your library is a creature card. Next up, we have Eldrazi Monument. Eldrazi Monument is a 5-cost artifact. Creatures you control get +1/+1 and have flying and indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. If you can't, sacrifice Eldrazi Monument. So this makes all of your creatures bigger, gives them flying, gives them indestructible, and all you have to do to maintain it is sacrifice one of your tokens every turn. That is not a very high price to pay. Fantastic card, very utilitarian, can definitely win you the game. We have Dreamstone Hydron, which is a 6-cost tap to add 3 colorless to your mana pool. You may also pay 3 colorless and tap it to sacrifice it and draw 3 cards. So you get some card draw, get some ramp. We have Hydron Archive, which is very similar. It is a 4-cost instead of a 6-cost. And you pay 2 instead of 3 to sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. So this is a smaller version of the Dreamstone Hydron. It's cheaper, slightly less effective. We also have Arcane Signet. It's a 2-cost artifact that taps to add 1 mana of any color to your in your commander's identity to your mana pool. This also counts for any color in this deck. So you would be, even though this is devoid and it is colorless, you can tap this for one of any of the 5 colors. Everflowing Chalice is a 0-cost artifact with multi-kicker 2, which means that as you cast it, you may pay an additional 2 any number of times. 2 colorless. It enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time that it was kicked, and you can tap it and add a colorless to your mana pool for each charge counter on it. Idol of Oblivion is pretty quintessential in a deck like this. It's a 2-cost tap to draw a card. You can only activate that ability if you've created a token this turn, so you get some good card draw, but it also has a secondary ability of pay 8 colorless and tap it, sacrifice Idol of Oblivion, create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. Rishkar's Expertise is a 6-cost green sorcery here. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Now we do have a lot of 10/10s in this deck. You may cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So not only are you drawing a whole bunch of cards, then you are also able to free cast a spell with mana cost 5 or less. We also have Ancient Stirrings is a 1-cost sorcery, green. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a colorless card from among them and put it into your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Most of the cards in this deck are colorless, and so essentially, look at the top 5 cards of your library. Chances are good that you'll probably have at least 4 of those count as colorless. And you reveal that card, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library. Pretty darned straightforward. Skittering Invasion is another Eldrazi tribal sorcery, so it counts as an Eldrazi spell when you cast it. It's a 7-cost that creates 5/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens. Those creature tokens have sacrifice this creature, add 1 specifically colorless to your mana pool. There is Selective Obliteration, is a 5-cost colorless sorcery. Each player chooses a color, and then exile each permanent unless it's colorless or it is only the color its controller chose. So this is very situational. Honestly, I feel like we could probably do a whole lot better, because most players, it doesn't specify that they have to choose a color in their commander identity or anything like that. And so most players worth their salt would choose a color that they don't control, and therefore this would just kind of fall flat and do nothing. No, I'm so sorry. I read that wrong. I'm so sorry. I'm going to read that again. Each player chooses a color, then exile each permanent unless it's colorless or it is only the color its controller chose. And so this would exile all multicolored permanents, just flat out. And it would, okay, there it is. Yep, it would exile all multicolored permanents, and it would exile all but one monocolor permanents that your opponents control. You know what I'm saying. I'm not able to speak right now. I'm going to try this one more time. Each player will pick one color. Every permanent that is not only and exactly that one monocolor that they pick that they control will be exiled. And so they will want to pick a color that they control. They won't want to pick a color that they don't, otherwise they're just going to exile everything. This will exile all of their multicoloreds just by default, which will include all of their commanders, which will be very beneficial. And on top of that, it will reduce them, for the moment, to whatever they have on the field of one of their chosen colors. And whatever monocolored permanents they have of that color that they choose. So it's a very powerful board wipe, especially for only a 5 cost, and that it doesn't hit you. Ugin's Insight is a 5 cost blue sorcery. Scry X, where X is the highest mana value among the permanents you control, then draw 3 cards. There are a lot of very high mana cost cards in here, so you'd be able to scry X, and basically, as you're scrying X, you choose 3 of those cards and put them into your hand, and put the rest either on the bottom of your library in any order, or on the top of your library in any order, or any mix therein. You would just get to pick all of that. Kozilek's Return is a 3 cost devoid instant. Kozilek's Return deals 2 damage to each creature. Whenever you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with mana value 7 or greater, you may exile Kozilek's Return from your graveyard. If you do, Kozilek's Return deals 5 damage to each creature. So, when you cast it, each creature is dealt 2. Each creature is dealt 2 damage, but you may also cast, whenever you cast a high value Eldrazi spell, you can recast it. You may exile it from your graveyard, at which point you are dealing extra damage. Sorry, you're not actually recasting it, and that is important because of this. You're not actually recasting it. The exile, that ability goes on the stack as 1 trigger instead of as 2. It goes on as boom, right? You cast the spell, there's the trigger, and then boom, it goes on the stack as you may exile this. If you do, it deals damage. So, exile it is a trigger. It is 2 parts. It is 2 parts. But, either way, you are not casting it, and so that is important. It doesn't count for that. I'm sorry. Alright, Eldritch Immunity is a 1 cost Eldrazi instant. That is very, very useful in this deck. Very useful, because you can pay 1 colorless to be able to trigger this an additional time at instant speed. That is phenomenal. Anyway, so target creature you control gains protection from each color until end of turn, but it also has overload of 5, and overload is you can replace each instant of target with each. And so instead of target creature you control, it's each creature you control gains protection from all colors until end of turn. So that is very helpful there. Coming up to the last 5 cards here, Eldrazi Confluence is a 4 cost instant. Choose 3, you may choose the same mode more than once. Target creature, mode 1, target creature gets +3, -3 until end of turn. Mode 2, exile target non-land permanent, then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. And mode 3, create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token with sacrifice this creature, add colorless to your mana pool. We have Warping Whale, which is a 2 cost colorless instant. Choose 1. Options are, number 1, exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. Option number 2, counter target sorcery spell. Option number 3, create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add colorless. Crib Swap is a 3 cost white kindred instant of Shapeshifter. Now, Shapeshifter spells will count as Eldrazi because it has Changeling. So when you cast this, you can also use it to trigger this. It's a 3-cost exile target creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. The creature token also can be an Eldrazi or whatever the blazes you want it to be, or they want it to be, and everything at the same time. So it is an Eldrazi, it is a elemental, it is a vampire, it is a tree if you want it to be, and even if you don't want it to be, it is still a tree. So that can be very useful for control. You can exile your own stuff, you can exile your opponent's stuff, whatever you end up needing. If you need a colorless creature, another colorless Eldrazi down to the battlefield for whatever reason, you can hit yourself, however you want to do it. But the spell itself is tribal and does count as Eldrazi. Suffer the Past is a black instant. It's the 1 black spell in this entire deck. It is black X cost. Exile X target cards from target player's graveyard. For each card exiled this way, that player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is a decent spell. I mean, in this deck, I feel like it doesn't really do a whole lot because you're not focusing on milling. You do a lot more exiling than you do milling. And so if it was returning cards from exile to graveyard, that would make more sense. But I guess you do have in this deck a solid amount of Annihilator, so I can see why this card would be in here for that Annihilator purpose. Next one is Return of the Wildspeaker. Is a 5-cost green instant. Choose 1. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. Or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So that can be very useful if done properly. And the last non-land card of this deck is Ugin the Ineffable. Is a 6-cost Planeswalker with base loyalty of 4. It has a passive ability. Colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. Its +1 ability, exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. It create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When that token leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card into your hand. So it's a pseudo draw mechanic. And then it's -3, destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So those are the non-land cards of the Eldrazi Incursion Precon. Next video, we'll go ahead and look at the lands and do a basic overview on the deck, the feel, how it plays overall, and I'll go into talking about plans that things that I want to do with it in the future. But for now, thanks for watching. Catch you later. Alright, welcome back. Today we're going to look at the final piece of the Eldrazi Incursion Precon. We'll look at the land cards, and then we will briefly discuss plans for the future of this deck, what I'm going to do with it, and kind of go a general overview of how the deck plays, how the deck feels, whether I would recommend it or not. But let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so first we're going to go through the basic lands. There are a lot of basic lands to go through in this deck. We have 1 mountain, 1 wastes, which is the specifically colorless equivalent of a basic land. We have 1 swamp, 1 forest, 1 plains, and 1 island. That is all the basic lands in this entire deck. Boom. There they are. Done. Now, we have 3 lands here that tap for colorless, but they also can be used to search your library for basic lands. Sorry, we only have 2 of those. So this one, you can tap it to sacrifice it to search your library for a forest, plains, or island. Basic, forest, plains, or island. This one, basic, swamp, mountain, or forest. And both of these have cycling 1 mana of each of their associated colors, which means you can pay that and discard this card to be able to draw a card. We also have Tectonic Edge, which is a land that taps for 1 colorless mana. And it has pay 1, tap, sacrifice Tectonic Edge, destroy target non-basic land, activate only if an opponent controls 4 or more lands. So you can a little bit of land destruction there. Not sure what the relevance of that is in this deck. We have 2 of the temple lands, which when they enter the battlefield, which they do tapped, you scry 1. And that we have the white-black and the black-green of those. Now we have a whole bunch of pain lands. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pain lands. All 10 pain lands. And these are the pain lands that either tap for colorless, or they tap for 1 of their 2 color identities. And also the land, when you do that, deals a damage to you. So we have 1 of those for each of the dual color combination options in Magic the Gathering. It's a complete set of the colorless pain lands, which is, in my opinion, kind of cool. Alright, then we have the Secluded Courtyard. Similar to the Unclaimed Territory. Matter of fact, almost identical to the Unclaimed Territory. Both of these lands enter tapped. When they do... No, sorry. They don't enter tapped. I read that. I'm getting ahead of myself. When they enter the battlefield, you choose a creature type. They tap for colorless, and you may also tap them to add 1 mana of any color. Spend that mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type or activate an ability of a creature source of the chosen type. So this one you can use as for either abilities or casting creature spells. This one you can only use for casting creature spells. So that's important to note. We have Corrupted Crossroads. Taps for colorless, and you may also tap it to pay 1 life. And pay 1 life. Add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a spell with Devoid. So that rules out some of our spells that you can use that ability for. But we do have tons of Devoid in this deck. Path of Ancestry enters the battlefield tapped. Quintessential in just about every single tribal deck that you have. Taps, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. When that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with your commander, you scry 1. Opal Palace, taps for colorless. Alternatively, you can pay 1 colorless, 1 into it, and tap. Add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. If you spend this mana to cast your commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional 1/1 counters on it, equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone this game. So this is a color fixer rather than that ability is a color fixer rather than a adding mana to your pool. Is you put 1 in and you get 1 of a different color out is how that would work. Or you could just tap it for colorless. Cascading Cataracts works very similar. This one is indestructible. It taps for colorless. But instead of paying 1 and getting out 1, this one you put in 5 and you get out 5. In any combination of colors that you want. So it's kind of a larger scale conversion. Command Tower taps for 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Again, in this deck, because it's 5 color identity, that can tap for any color that you want. Colorless is not a color, that just for the record. You cannot tap Command Tower to get out a colorless mana. I don't think. Exotic Orchard taps to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce, which in a 5 color deck, you're guaranteed to be able to tap it for at least something useful. Ash Barrens, pretty straightforward, also taps for a colorless. Basic land cycling of 1, meaning you pay 1 colorless and discard this card. You can search your library for a basic land. We have Ruins of Oran Reef. Enters the battlefield tapped, taps for a colorless, but alternatively can tap to put a 1/1 counter on target colorless creature that entered the battlefield this turn. There is Tendo Icebridge, which is a land that enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it, and a single charge counter. You can either tap this land for 1 colorless, or you can tap it and remove that charge counter to add 1 mana of any color. So it's kind of a one-off, 1 mana of any color, but then after that it's just exclusively colorless. We have Bondar's Enclave, taps for colorless. Alternatively, pay 3 colorless into it, tap it, you can draw a card, but you can only activate that ability if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which will not be much of a difficulty in this deck. Got lots of really large creatures. Reliquary Tower, you have no maximum hand size, tap to add a colorless. Spawning Bed is always really fun in Eldrazi decks, taps to add a colorless. Also, you can pay 6 and tap it, sacrifice it, create 3 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens. They have sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. Also, Tomb of the Spirit Dragon, tap it to add a colorless, or pay 2 and tap it. You gain 1 life for each colorless creature you control. In this deck, with the colorless legions that you can produce with your Scions and Spawns and all your tokens, this can pay off in dividends. Eldrazi Temple taps for colorless, also taps for 2 colorless. Spend this mana. If you tap it for 2, you spend that mana only to cast colorless Eldrazi spells or activate abilities of colorless Eldrazi, which is 99.9% of this deck. And the last land in this deck is the Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. Taps for a colorless, or taps for 2 colorless. Spend this mana only to cast colorless spells. Activate only if you control 7 or more lands. So, that is the culmination of all of the land cards in this deck. We've now gone over the entire deck list. So, conclusions. This is a very versatile deck. It can, if used correctly, very quickly have a massive board state, but it can also, just as quickly, if you're not careful with how you use the stack, can end up leaving you in the same amount of turns with the exact same cards, can leave you with absolutely nothing. So you got to be careful, very strategic about how you play it. I had a whole lot of fun when I played this. I'm looking forward to being able to play it a little bit more. What I want to do is I want to upgrade this. I want to take this deck and I want to change it up. I want to use some of my whole bunch of Zendikar Devoid cards mixed in there. Maybe buy some extra upgrades. But I want to make this better using this kind of as a template and a core, and upgrade it, turn it into something that's unique and more custom to how I would like to play it. I will probably do another video on, or maybe another series of videos even, on the upgrades and the changes that I make to this deck in the future. But I definitely would recommend this deck. It's more on the spendy side of the commanders, of the precons. But if you enjoy a technical game, I would definitely recommend looking into this precon. It's a lot of fun to play. if you're the sort of a person that gets enjoyment from diving into the nitty-gritty mechanics of the stack and making sure everything is just so, if you prefer a simpler game, I might recommend you not look at this one and you look into maybe getting one of the other precons. But as for me, I really enjoyed this. I'm going to totally be upgrading this and hanging on to it. But anyway, for now, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like and subscribe. I'll catch you next week.